Hey there! Today I'm doing my final August wrap-up in the middle of September. I'm a little late on this one, but I've been pretty busy getting back into the swing of things, going back to school, and I've also been living in denial where I feel like making this video is like accepting that my summer vacation is over and I'm no longer going to be able to read at the same pace that I did in the summer when I wasn't working, so that's a little sad for me. But overall, I am ready to face reality and make this video and tell you about the books that I read in the last 2 weeks of my summer vacation. The first set of books I have to show you are all by authors from the American South. I had a real craving for Southern literature after going on a quick little holiday to New Orleans. This was my first time in Louisiana and I had a lot of fun. Especially I enjoyed the overwhelming humidity and the creepy cemeteries, and I really loved the bayou, and I got to hold a baby alligator, so it was a pretty cool trip. And one of the books I was reading during my trip was The Wild Palms by William Faulkner. A couple summers ago, I went on a big Faulkner kick, and I haven't read any of his books since then, so it was nice for me to return back to his writing and to read another one of his books, although I cannot say that this one is one of my favorites. Part of the problem is that it's not set in his iconic Yoknapatawpha County, this fictional landscape that he created in Mississippi, and a lot of his other books have these recurring characters from these dynastic families. So I really love when you read his books and you kind of are familiar with the world, but this book is not set there. There are scenes set in various parts of the country. We're in New Orleans for a while, and then we're in some kind of mines in Utah. So this really is leaving Faulkner's comfort zone, and it didn't make for as strong a narrative in my opinion. This novel is made up of two quite separate stories that you alternate back and forth between chapters, and the second one of these is set in Mississippi. So Faulkner is in his element here, he is writing what he knows, and it's actually set at Parchman Prison, which you will be familiar with if you read Jesmyn Ward's Sing Unburied Sing. And this is about a huge flood that happened in Mississippi in the 30s, I think, and the prisoners are forced to evacuate from the prison, and one prisoner kind of accidentally escapes. He doesn't really mean to, but he escapes on this boat and ends up trying to save this pregnant lady, and it's about his adventures. I think this was my favorite of the two sections, although it certainly had its monotonous moments, because there's really only so much you can say about the brown, muddy waters of the Mississippi surrounding you. So it did get really repetitive and slow, but I think it was more cohesive than the mess that was the other part of this story. Now, I thought for sure I was going to be more interested in this story of a doomed affair, but I think my issue with this was that you never got a sense of passion between these two people who are supposedly giving everything up to be together. Like, they're kind of just these sad people who had sad lives that somewhat find solace in each other, so it just never had an intensity that I was hoping that it would have, and I just had a hard time understanding what these characters saw in each other and why they felt like continuing on with this relationship. So this part of the book was quite a disappointment on a lot of fronts. This was a pretty forgettable Faulkner read for me, so if I do return back to his work, I will hopefully pick up something set back in the Yoknapatawpha country, since that is what I seem to enjoy a lot more. The other book that I read while on vacation in New Orleans was, of course, the New Orleans classic, A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. This was a reread for me. I had first read it back in high school, and my memory's awful, so I really did not remember a lot about this book, except that I kind of liked it, and that my copy of the book at the time was missing a chapter at like a pretty exciting point in the plot, so that was kind of annoying. So I guess this is my first time reading it through in its entirety. Now, this book is pretty hyped up for being like the funniest book that you're ever gonna read in your life, and all the quotes on the back are about everyone like busting up their guts laughing over this book. So, you know, it is not a laugh out loud kind of funny book for me, although it certainly does have its humorous moments. The thing about the comedy in this book is that it is very overdone. Like, these are over the top caricatures. This is not painting humanity in a nice light. So if you're someone that is looking for like a very subtle kind of humorous book with lots of clever wordplay, this is not one of those books. Like, it is really brash, it's over the top, it's very cartoonish. I think that this book is held together by its unforgettable protagonist, Ignatius C. Reilly, who is this medieval scholar that is also living at home, and he's kind of unhealthy, and he is struggling to try to get a job, and he just goes through all sorts of fails throughout his day-to-day, but I really like his feisty, vivacious spirit. He's very disgusted by the moral failings of modern-day society, and yet he's a pretty big mess himself, but I thought he was a fun character to follow around, especially as he's trying to find work, pushing around a hot dog cart while eating all of the hot dogs himself and basically making no profit. So I liked his character. The other characters in this book kind of get repetitive, and I would say that's my main issue with this book, is that over 400 pages, the jokes just kind of wear themselves out because these characters are very one note. They're not these very complex characters, so while they can be funny in the first half of the book, you've kind of seen the same thing over and over again by the end. So that was one of my issues with this book. Also, I feel like some of the humor in this is quite dated now. So there was a really stereotypical portrayal of the gay community in this book that would not fly today. I also felt like the treatment of female characters in this book was a little bit harsh. Now, I get that it's a satire and he's making fun of everyone and everyone's character is supposed to be a stereotype, yet most of the men in this book have happy endings at the expense of the women in their lives. So the women are just kind of these shrews that are just like trying to boss the men around in their lives, but really the men kind of get last laughs and they leave these evil women behind. So I felt all those shrewish portrayals of women kind of wore themselves out by the end. So overall, I'd say that this book is pretty fun and totally worth it for the main character, but the comedy does sort of play itself out by the end, and it does feel a little bit one note at times. Next, I read a collection of short stories called Sweet and Low by Nick White. Again, this is by a Southern author set in the South, perfect for those kind of late days of summer where it's really hot and you're just sitting out on your porch unwinding in a good long story. So I did quite enjoy this collection overall. There was nothing that like stood out really and like blew me away, but there was also nothing that stuck out for being weak. So I feel like this was just a solid collection of stories, and I did get quite invested in each story and wanted to know what was going to happen, which is really all I'm expecting from a short story collection. I just want to bounce around between the lives of relatively interesting people because I'm nosy. So this collection did deliver on that front. It was pretty fun, and I feel like the stories were very well crafted. I also appreciate that a lot of these stories explored the perspective of being queer in the South, and the last 5 or so stories in the collection are interconnected by a certain character who you see at various moments in his life, so I also do appreciate that when you have those kind of linkages between stories. So overall, I thought that this was fun. It's not the kind of book that you need to drop everything and buy now, but if you do have an interest in well-told short stories set in the South, then Nick White is a new voice that you might want to check out. The last Southern read that I got around to is the American modern classic, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. I feel like a lot of the reviews that I've seen of this book mention how Carson McCullers was only 23 years old when she published this thing, and I certainly think that it's impressive to have such a mature view of life at that age, but at the same time, there's something almost a little dull about this book, and I don't want to like say that because it is a good book and I know a lot of people love it, but there's something that is just very serious and American about this book that I just felt there was some kind of spark of life that was missing, and that could just be me as a reader. But this is seriously, like, it is excellent, it is well crafted, and there are some really great characters in here, especially with the heart and soul of this novel, John Singer, who is a deaf man, and his neighbors start to become a little obsessed with him. There are 4 characters in this book who begin conversing with John, which basically means that they are talking at him since he does not respond verbally. So they can kind of just pour out their interior monologues and all their thoughts about life at this person who is just taking it in and listening. And this book did make me realize how important it is to just truly listen to each other without always trying to add your own viewpoint and get your opinions across, but to really just take someone who they are and just let them vent. But then you also wonder the negative effects that this can have, to always be the person that is internalizing these things and not getting to share his own voice back. Another character that I really liked in here was Mick, who is a young girl kind of becoming a teenager, and she is growing up in a family and they're very poor. They run a boarding house, but they're very much nickel and diming everything, and she is obsessed with classical music. She can only sometimes hear snippets of it on her neighbor's radio. I strongly connected to her character since I was also a teenager obsessed with music, and I loved any scene where she was really greedily trying to hold on to music, and what she was thinking about, like when she heard Beethoven's Eroica Symphony for the first time, was truly beautiful writing. I like how this book is constructed around these different narrative perspectives, and I think everyone would have a unique experience with this book depending on which character they are most interested in. So while I connected with Mick for personal reasons, I was also quite fascinated by the other characters who exist more on the fringes of society and who are kind of railing against the system. So there is one man who is very anti-capitalist, and he has so much rage about the system and how corrupt and wrong it is, but he also feels like there's nothing that he can do, and he's saying, you know, it's just that people don't know. If people knew how bad the system was, they would do something about it. And I thought that was kind of sad reading that in the digital age, because I feel like most people do know. Like, it's pretty well known on the internet how this wealth imbalance is only getting more and more out of control, but even with people knowing things, it doesn't really change anything. And then there is also a character in here who is black, and of course he is mad about all the racism in America, how the country is structured as a racist entity. And again, I also felt bad for him from a present day perspective, because it's like things have not gotten easier on that front either. So lots of interesting viewpoints explored in this novel, so I'm glad that I checked this one out, and I would be curious to try some more Carson McCullers in the future. Moving from the south of America to the north of Europe, I was able to reread The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. Now, this is my favorite book. I've mentioned it quite a lot on this channel, and there is something so nice about returning to your favorite, because you just know you're going back to a world that you just love and you feel very at home in. So I don't really know why I feel that way. The Master and Margarita shouldn't be like a pleasant reread for me, since it is such a chaotic and strange novel, but that's just the way it is. I really like reading this book in August. I think that's the only month I've ever read this book in. It's almost like a tradition now, so I was happy to keep that alive. While this book is best known for its first half, where the devil takes a trip to Moscow with his posse that includes a deranged choir master and a talking black cat, I realized on my third read-through that it is really the second half of this book that I love so deeply. So while the first half is really just fun and games for me, it is really the second half that just makes my heart beat faster. I just love the story when Margarita, the titular character, comes in and becomes a witch and goes through this really intense experience to try to save her lover, the master. And I'm not usually a romantic person, but I just love this story, so it just makes me happy every time I return to this book, so I was really happy to make some time for it and go through the madness all over again. And lastly, I will talk about the 3 Shakespeare plays that I read. So when I started off the summer, I did not have any intentions of reading Shakespeare, but I read Midsummer's Night Dream and just enjoyed it, so I just kept the ball rolling. And over the course of the summer, I read 8 plays by Shakespeare, all new to me. So that was actually a lot of fun, and I hope that I can keep that going throughout the year. So this month, I was able to finish off the Henriade cycle of plays with Henry V. So, you know, I had read 3 plays building up to this. I thought that this was going to be the kind of big one, the most exciting play, since it is about this kind of epic war between England and France. And somehow, surprisingly, this was my least favorite of the plays in the cycle. So it was a little bit of a letdown. I guess I just preferred Henry when he was clowning around as Prince Hal. There just seems to be an emptiness without Falstaff pulling off all these crazy stunts. So this book just isn't really as funny as some of the other plays in the cycle, and it is about battle, so the scenes are kind of in this war setting, which I'm not as interested in, and I feel like Shakespeare went out of his way to just keep reminding us that he has a crappy stage setup and we need to use our imaginations to help him out. I didn't appreciate all those reminders. Also, there was an intense shift in tone going into the fifth act, where this had been a play all about battle and war, and then all of a sudden it turned into this rom-com where King Henry was trying to seduce Catherine of France, and just it wasn't a very strong way to end the play for me. So this one didn't work out super well. Still glad to have read it, but not my favorite. I also feel the same way about Julius Caesar, which I know is another really well-loved Shakespearean tragedy that I thought was just okay. There were certain elements of this play that I absolutely loved, especially the intense atmosphere and all these ominous events that occur before the death of Caesar, and I also loved Mark Antony's iconic speech to the people, trying to get them to change their mind. But I feel like after that point, the play reaches this high and just starts dwindling away from there quite quickly. So the problem with this one is I feel like the potential is so good and the first half of this play is awesome, and then it just doesn't feel as strong in the second half. So while I was expecting to love this one, it didn't end up being one of my favorites, but I think it is one that I will keep returning to throughout my life. I mean, there's so much juicy tension going on in the relationship of Brutus and Cassius and what each of their deal is, and you have to love the irony of this play, where this conspiracy thinks that by taking an extreme measure, they are ultimately doing service to the public good. By killing Caesar, they can somehow save democracy, and yet by killing Caesar, they only hasten its demise. So there's something kind of sad about that, and interesting commentary in here on whether it is possible to really do things for the good of the people and whether that's actually what the characters are intending. So interesting ideas in here. Not the greatest execution, but still really glad I checked this one out. The last Shakespearean play that I read was Coriolanus. Now, over the course of the summer, I read 3 out of 4 of Shakespeare's Roman tragedies. So I guess I need to get to Antony and Cleopatra sometime soon so I could finish off the set. And I think this one has been my favorite so far of his Roman plays. Coriolanus is an intriguing play since it is built around such a heroic yet extremely unlikable character. So Coriolanus essentially is a war hero. He fights bravely for Rome, and he's won some epic victories, and he returns home, and the Roman Senate wants to reward him by giving him a promotion to consul. He also needs the consent of the people, and the issue is that he is just very contemptuous and openly dismissive of the people, so this creates quite a bit of a problem for him, and since it's a Shakespearean tragedy, you know that it's just not going to work out. So this play was just kind of one of those car crashes that you didn't want to look away from because you're like, this is just such a bad situation. I want to see it all go up in flames. So I had a lot of fun reading this play. It was quite a page turner, and I am going to be seeing a live version of this fairly soon that has been getting great reviews, so I'm super excited to see how this one's going to work out in person because I just liked this play. This one seems very underrated. You don't hear this one talked about very much, but I thought it was a fascinating portrayal of Roman politics. So that's it for the books that I read this August. I am sad that summer reading has come to an end. It has been really nice to just read like a machine without anything to get in my way, but at the same time, I'm pretty excited to be back at school, and I've got some great classes, and I'm pretty excited about this year, so I'm not going to be too sad, and I still am finding time to read at night, so you will be hearing from me again. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again later.